He simplified things and he went to a 4-2-3-1, which allowed them to be connected in triangles in order to beat the press.
This midfielder, Jake Rosansky, I'd be really interested to see what his future looks like. He was really good on the ball, but he had really good service. Like, I think New England had 9 corner kicks. Granted, they didn't convert a single one of them, which is a whole nother issue. This U-20 World Cup, outside of wanting to perform and win, should be setting the stage for young players and changing over and seeing some new kids get into the full team.
Maybe the MLS it should be way better than the U20 competition we're going to be playing against, but it's not the same atmosphere.
And there's so many pieces to dive into for this Washington Spirit team, but I think it all starts with Mark Parsons and his phenomenal coaching.
Savannah DeMello is dangerous. It's not just triangles. He also plays his triangles on different planes of the field, so they can bypass breaking the lines and then come back breaking the lines and then go forward again breaking the lines.
Welcome back into Straight from the Pitch. I'm Anna Whitty, joined as always by Scotty Schweitzer. And one thing I've said up until this week is that MLS didn't come across as unpredictable until right now. They got rid of 2 head coaches last week in the league. Sporting KC gets their second win of the season, beating Minnesota 3-0. And Chicago Fire, they beat St. Louis 1-0 with their new head coach in Frank Klappus, who comes back into that role for the club. City didn't have some star players on the pitch. They didn't have Klaus, who's coming back from a leg injury earlier this season. Did you see in that game a coaching change affecting it, or a game plan and the players willing to win being the difference?
I think in the Chicago-St. Louis game, there was a little bit of both. For St. Louis, without Klaus, I think he is a big part of their energy, and then also with his ability to stay up front, playing that 9 role, holding the ball up, giving them pressure, starting the pressure. They also didn't have their Ironman in the back, Parker, and I think he is with yellow card accumulations, and we talked about it earlier in a couple of shows, that he puts his hands on players. He gets a little aggressive sometimes at times, and it wasn't going to cost him in these particular games, but after a certain amount of yellow card accumulations, you're going to have to miss a game. Berkey said after the game he felt like just something was missing. Their coach said, they had some really good points. The result wasn't there, but they were playing pretty well, and he liked some of the things that they did do on the field. So in St. Louis's eyes, they were missing some pieces, so that's a little bit easier to get over with. I think Klaus, though, he brings a different energy to that team. He gives them a different attitude, a different swagger to them. And when he's not on the field, they're a completely different team. He's a lot more effective in the way they play, the role he plays for them, and allows them to be St. Louis City with their high press. On Chicago's side, and I kind of badmouthed Klopas last week, but what he did was he simplified things and he went to a 4-2-3-1, which allowed them to be connected in triangles in order to beat the press of St. Louis. And it worked really, really well for them, and they got the result. Their goalie did a good job. They scored a goal in the 70th, I think, minute. So later in the game, they scored their goal, and then their goalie did what he needed to do. He made a couple saves after that just to keep them in the game. But it was more of a simplification of what they had and what they have. And then they had, I thought Gutierrez played really good, and he also changed and moved. Why can't I think of the Swiss kid's name? He moved them into the middle, and he moved Gutierrez out wide. So
they moved him into the 10.
They moved him into the 10 role where he's been playing out wide, and they moved him into a 10, which I think in the MLS is a better fit for him to be the playmaker centrally than trying to be the playmaker out wide, because other teams can take him away. So when that happened, but I think Klopas simplified the game for his players. Now at the same time, when you lose your coach and you get a brand new coach, everybody has to then re-impress the coach. Nobody's spots are secure. So everyone is now trying to, all the players that weren't playing before now think they have a chance. The players that were playing are a little worried. Is my spot secure? Is it not secure? So I think that all played into why the game went the way it did. But to give it to Klopas, give him some credit. He did go to that 4-2-3-1, and it was solely to connect everybody easy, that you didn't have to really think about it. You didn't have to think about where you were going to be. As long as we stayed in our formation. A few years ago, I used to coach the pro team in Carolina, the Carolina Railhawks, and our team wasn't highly intelligent as soccer players, skillful players, good athletes, But what we did was we went to a 4-3-2-1, almost a Christmas tree, because it only allowed space high and wide away from our goal. So we did a system that allowed us to stay in every game, being a weaker team than most of the teams that we played against. And I think that's kind of what Klopas did this week is he took a formation that allowed his players to kind of be themselves, but also help them out, staying linked as a unit. And he was doing it to beat St. Louis's press, which I think he did it pretty effectively. It wasn't the greatest game of soccer, but it was what Chicago needed at the time, especially at this time in the season.
Yeah, I think it also goes to show that maybe a new coach in a system, like you said, players want to prove themselves. But Klopas has been around the Chicago Fire team. He knows what this team needs in certain spots. Maybe sometimes a completely fresh perspective isn't what a club needs in an instance. Someone who knows what the shift can be. And the player you're talking about, Scotty, in the 10 is Shaqiri. And they wanted him and Gutierrez in the
Yeah.
left to be on the pitch together. And I think that system worked well for Chicago to get the win against St. Louis and keep us on our toes. And that's what we wanted, right? We asked for MLS to give us stuff that was different, get us excited. 9 red cards, Chicago beating St. Louis, Sporting KC absolutely crushing Minnesota. Some really good storylines so far this season. And you mentioned Gutierrez, and he's a player. We'll get into the U-20 World Cup going on later in the show. But that's happening this Saturday. And he is a Chicago Fire midfielder, but he probably would have been in Argentina preparing for the World Cup if things were different, if Chicago would have released him there. So I think there's pros and cons to MLS sending players to the World Cup, and we'll get to that later in the show. But he's one player that if MLS wasn't happening, he likely would be on that U-20 World Cup roster. Inter Miami beating New England 2-1. David Ruiz gets a red card in the 81st minute. It doesn't matter. Inter Miami beats New England, who you said, I didn't get to catch this game, Scotty, but you said this was New England's game, and the scoreline maybe didn't show exactly what we saw.
Yeah, I thought New England was by far the better team. They actually looked really good. And I'm usually not a big fan of Bruce Arena's style of soccer, but this team looks a little bit different than his normal style of soccer, where they really knock the ball around. They know Carlos Gil is their man, their playmaker, and they go through him. And he did get the goal early in the first half or late in the first half. Noel Buck, he got a goal, but it got disallowed by VAR. But New England was really good. The thing that worked for Miami is New England goes into this game knowing they're the better team, and they don't sit back. They play a free flowing freestyle of soccer. So what that allowed is when things did break down, Miami was able to play their style of soccer and counterattack, and they capitalized on their chances. But to be honest, I really thought New England was by far the better team. Miami did what they needed to do to get the win, but they had their opportunities and they took advantage of their opportunities when there were some sloppy passes in the midfield. They were able to break out because New England is trying to get forward. They are trying to attack. And when you do that, you are susceptible to the counterattack. And that's kind of how Miami was able to get a hold of the game, take advantage, and get the result.
I didn't get to watch this game. However, I got to call the next pro game between New England and Toronto this past weekend. And New England wins. I think they won 3-2. Yeah, they won 3-2 against Toronto FC2, who started the game strong. But it was really New England's game. Their possession looked really good. They had really solid center midfielders, and that seems to be what New England is looking for, players who can play, provide service in the midfield. And it was fun talking to Coach Clint Piet about his off the field story and how he became the head coach of Next Pro. He had been through the system with Bruce Arena, his head coach at UVA. And then he went to the U-23 World Cup with Bruce Arena, was looking for a job, and had that relationship with Arena. But I always ask them, and this is credit to you, Scotty, when we talked probably a year ago now about Next Pro, and you saying how we talked about how the Next Pro is obviously the feeder to the first team. So I always ask these head coaches, do you see the game the same way as you see it with your head coach? And Clint Piet said he did, but also being around him for so long, he's going to have a similar soccer mind just because of the influence. So it was interesting to see New England possess, play well, and that really reflect what we see on the first team. New England still at the top of the table.
I think that's one thing. Credit to Bruce Arena. He's loyal to his ex players. He's loyal to his coaching staff, but that allows him to have a similarity in the thinking and the mindset of what they're looking for day in and day out. So now with the next pro being around in Clint PA, who was his player, who played with him at UVA, who played with him at times with the national team,
Mhm.
he knows what Bruce is looking for. So when he's going through his philosophies, which were kind of handed down to him as a player through his coach of Bruce Arena, it allows him to more easily fine tune what he's trying to help the pro team to move these players up and move them forward to get to being able to be playing with Bruce Arena on that national team. And that's exactly how New England plays. They play through their midfield. They're looking to not bypass the midfield. They're looking to get the balls into the midfield, get the ball into their playmakers. And from what it sounds like, that's exactly what Clint is trying to do with the next pro team. So it's an easy transition for these players to move up into the full team ranks.
There's one player who stood out to me Sunday night was the match was this midfielder Jake Rosansky. I'd be really interested to see what his future looks like. He was really good on the ball, but he had really good service. Like I think New England had 9 corner kicks. Granted, they didn't convert a single one of them, which is a whole nother issue, but it's also an ex-pro team. So he is really good in the midfield, great service. So keep your eyes out if you're a New England fan. Was there a player on the Inter Miami team who wasn't on the U, maybe potentially in Gutierrez similar position that impacted the New England Inter Miami match?
Yeah, he's actually on New England. He's
Okay.
his name is Noel Buck. He's
Okay.
18 years old. I thought he was phenomenal in this game. I think Carlos Gil is by far their best player, but it also allows Buck, who plays in the midfield, almost like a winger, but he's a midfielder. It allows him this freedom, and he plays very European. He has a very European game to him, and he's an American. So, like for me, as the game was going, so Gutierrez was invited into the U-20 team, and Chicago decided to decline to release him.
Mhm.
This kid, Noel Buck, wasn't even invited, which to me is shocking. Like I would love to know why he wasn't invited because he was very influential on how they attacked in New England. Like it wasn't like everything went through Carlos Gil, and then he got the scraps. They played through this kid Noel Buck on the outside. They played 12 games. He started 10 for New England. It's just to me, it's like I don't understand how this kid wasn't even invited to be
Mhm.
part of this. Now, if he was invited, Bruce Arena said he would have not. He would have let him go. This is an opportunity. He would never take that away from a player. But he didn't even have the opportunity to say yes or no to it because Noel Buck was never even invited. I'm very critical of soccer players in America. I think they need to do more. I think they need to be more professional. I think they need to be mentally stronger. I think they need to hone their craft more. But when I was watching this young player Noel Buck, it looks like he is on the right path. He's had great coaching as a youth player. He understood his role. He understood his defensive responsibilities. He understood how to attack. And as Miami made slight little changes, he adapted to them and was still completely effective the entire game that he was in there.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned a great point, and something we wanted to talk about this week was the U-20 World Cup. And a lot of people are on both sides of the aisle, I guess you could say. And I understand both perspectives of teams wanting MLS teams to allow their U-20 players to go to this World Cup. And then, people understanding that it is in the middle of an MLS season. This is a huge year for MLS getting on Apple, having new broadcasts. This is how they're growing, and they're starting this season with a big effort. So the U-20 World Cup kicks off this Saturday. The United States have players featured from 17 different clubs, including 10 MLS teams. 6 players on the roster are playing abroad right now. The group stage kicks off Saturday, and they have Ecuador, Fiji, and Slovakia. The full team's CONCACAF Gold Cup semis kick off June 15th against Mexico. And for me, this U-20 World Cup, outside of wanting to perform and win, should be setting the stage for young players and changing over and seeing some new kids get into the full team, being a part of that June 15th Gold Cup and the future of what the full team looks like. So I guess to start, Scotty, what do you think? Do you think MLS should allow these players to go, or do you think it's a good decision by the clubs to hold on to them?
I 100% think they should have been allowed to go. It doesn't make any sense to me why they would hold them back. And I can understand you're saying you have to do what's best for the club. But at the same time, you have to do what's best for the game and best for the MLS. The way they speak of themselves is they want players to stay in the MLS, not to go overseas, just to be the prominent league in the world. So you have to let your players get into an opportunity. Whereas Cade Cowell's maybe the one player who to me is the outlier of it, because he is a star for San Jose. Whereas Gutierrez is not the star for Chicago. But when he goes and plays for the 20s, he would be the star. So now it's a different mentality. Now it's a different attitude. Now you are the one that has to show up. You have to. You're not just a role player. You're not just a player who the other teams are not setting their plays for, who not trying to stop you. They are trying to stop you. So can you handle that environment? Can you handle that situation? Can you handle that pressure? And that's good for because the U20s is the feeder for the national team. So these players are going to the U20s, and if Cade Cowell just lights it up and is amazing, and let's say we win it, well, then he needs to be looked at for a roster spot for the Gold Cup. And I think that's where it's a different situation. Whereas if I'm the national team coach and I'm watching, let's just say this Noel Buck kid, well, can I say, yeah, he's having a really good game, but there's 3 other players that teams are game planning for, and they're not game planning for Noel Buck. So it's sure he's having a good game, but he can slip through the cracks against teams and have really good games. Whereas when you go with your 20s, these players are the stars, and teams are game planning to stop them. They'll be game planning to stop Cade Cowell. How does he handle that pressure? How does he handle that? Does he make his adjustments? And that's good for me as a national team coach to see, because it's a totally different way I have to look at each player's style of play on the field. Yes, the MLS is good. Maybe the MLS it should be way better than the U20 competition we're going to be playing against, but it's not the same atmosphere. It's not the same mindset that these players have to go through. Are they the captains? Are they the leaders? Whereas I don't think Cade Cowell is the captain of San Jose. He might be one of the leaders, but he's got another veteran player. So these young players have to be put in these situations in order to continue to grow their career, continue to take the steps to becoming the full player that they are going to become later in their careers.
Cade Cowell's 19 years old, so he's kind of in the middle when it comes to age, but definitely on the younger side in MLS specifically. Like I said, I could see both ways. However, I do see what you're saying. Like, MLS wants to grow soccer in America. They want their players to be on the national team because it's a higher pedestal and it gets more eyes on the leagues here, the teams here in the league. They don't want, the US national team just going to Premier League and grabbing those players. So making sure that these quote unquote smaller tournaments for the U20s, even though it is the World Cup, it's not the World Cup on the full team, is allowing players to figure out the system and what they want to do. And following the World Cup that's coming up for the women's team, Vlatko Andonovski, I've heard and I assume he's looking for players that fits his system. However, he needs to know what players he has to make the right system. So while you're building up, while you're trying to build to a bigger World Cup in this full team, figure out what players you have and who works well together, and allow as many numbers to come into the World Cup who you think are the best players that we have here in America to play together and get those reps together before they get older and get those bigger opportunities.
Sometimes we have to look at it as too, and it's hard as fans, whereas maybe the best team isn't always the best players. And that's a hard thing to do. Like, we could look at Belgium, who had so much talent and so much on the men's side, so much talent, but they didn't really link and click well together. They didn't mix good. Their chemistry wasn't good, but they had all these great superstar players. Kevin De Bruyne is a shell of himself when he plays for Belgium compared to when he is at Man City. So sometimes you have to take players that just make the team better, and that's a hard thing to do on the national team level, because you don't have as much accessibility to each other through trainings and stuff, because you're only with each other a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there, a couple weeks there, maybe a month if you're lucky before the World Cup, but you've already picked your team. So it's hard to understand, is Coffey the right fit? Is it Ertz? Is it Sullivan? So you're trying to get the right player to make all the players better around the team. And that doesn't always mean you have to bring the best player. You have to bring the best player to help the fit of the team, the chemistry of the team. So the team then moves and plays at their very best. And that's a hard thing for fans to understand because of the dynamics that go through every training session, the 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 camaraderie in the locker room, the attitudes, the ways of thinking. That's a hard thing for us as fans because we're not around it all the time. So sometimes a player gets picked and you're like, what? There's 5 players better than that player. But we don't understand how it all works on the field in the locker room because we're not there every day.
I would be pretty upset though if I knew I was a better player than someone who got an opportunity to go to the World Cup. But you're right; it does depend, and there's so many dynamics and things that happen. But to go back to the U-20 World Cup and for MLS to allow those players, U.S.Soccer needs those players in their system as often as they can to see who works well together, who already has friendships, who has relationships, and how that correlates to competitive matches and not just one-off trainings here or there throughout the year. So U-20 World Cup kicks off this Saturday. They are playing Ecuador. Should be a fun tournament to follow, especially as we get into Gold Cup this summer. Switching over to NWSL, there is a big game that I really enjoyed watching. It was my favorite one of the weekend. Racing Louisville beating Chicago Red Stars 3-0. Not a statement win whatsoever because this Chicago team has zero answers for anything right now. They have good pieces, like we kind of mentioned, Scotty, but that doesn't mean you have a good team. So 3 goals for Racing Louisville isn't the biggest storyline of this game. They got Savannah DeMello back after receiving a red card in their tie against OL Reign 2 matches prior. And it really showed that she is the main piece in the midfield. Even though Jalen Howell is in there, she's the captain in the 6. She's gotten better this season after her rookie year. DeMello's stepping forward. She's taking more shot opportunities. She's in the attack more. The back lines looked really good for Racing Louisville. And that goes into a holistic view of the coaching at NWSL continues to get better. Head coach for Racing, Kim Bjorkgren, is in his 2nd season. What have you seen from his coaching this year help this Racing Louisville progress in just the first 7 matches of the season?
Yeah, they're actually a very interesting team, and I think we both mentioned that last week when we did our personal rankings. They what they have done is they brought in Pickett and Ursig, and they're going to be starters, and they're veteran players, and they're leaders, and they're on the back line. And what it looks like is Bjorkagen, he took his team and he said, okay, we're going to understand our defensive shape, our defensive system, and we're going to get that down. That's what we're going to focus on early in the season. And because he's done that, that has helped Jalen Howe understand her role better. She's now the captain of the team. She sits right in the middle of the park. But you are right. Savannah DeMello is dangerous. And now because of their defensive shape and system and such a good understanding of it, and he has not wavered in any of his first 8 games of the season here. He has not wavered one single bit. So he set his defensive shape. And now that his defensive shape is understood, he has got players that understand their role, and it allows them to come out of when they win the ball back and they come out of their defensive shape into their attack, no one has a fear factor if they make a mistake. So they're taking more risks because when they lose the ball, they understand what their role is, what they have to do, and they have to get the ball back. So now that you watch them play, they're a much more dangerous team on both sides of the ball. And I think it is he was getting Ursig and Pickett used to everybody. He was getting everybody used to them. He's got leaders on the field. He's got the ability to attack out of the back. He's got ability to attack through his midfield. And DeMello is, like I said, she is nasty good. I feel sorry for her because it's so close to the World Cup where is it flukish? I don't think so at all. But you can say that as a coach of the national team because she's a player that can impact the game instantaneously. So even if you're down 1 goal, when I look at it, I'm like, wow, I would really like to be able to take her and bring her off the bench to be able to attack because she can do it with her passing. She can do it with her dribbling. She can create her own chances. She can create chances for everybody else. And you have to be aware of where she is on the field. And Jalen Howe, with her understanding of where Ursig is and where her back line is, she's feeling much more comfortable. And Jalen Howe is a player that is totally fine with doing the dirty work. So that allows DeMello to take even more risks into finding spaces higher up the pitch, more offensively minded, which she knows she has cover behind her. And Jalen Howe last year sat a little bit too deep for me. she's still doing the defensive role, but she pushes higher up the pitch, so they're actually have the ability to to defend less of the field. They have less space to defend because Ursay will push them up too. And you can tell already that this team is starting to really, really understand themselves and understand how they are. And they're one of the best full teams. They really have a team dynamic where it's not one player, it's this player. Even though DeMello is to me is so good, they have the ability that they're a real good team. They play with each other, they play for each other, and it's real interesting to watch. And you're right, you are really starting to see how good some of the coaches are in the NWSL, and they have to be because there's only 12 teams. So you're constantly replaying each other. And then you have the Challenge Cup games and you're replaying each other. And you can watch film on each other. Whereas the MLS with 29 teams, it's each week in, week out, it's a little bit different. So it's hard who's going to be playing, who isn't going to be playing. Where in the NWSL, you know the teams, you know the subs, you know the different lineups they can throw at you. We mentioned it earlier in the podcast a couple shows ago about how we weren't really worried about San Diego, even though they hadn't hit their stride because they had Stoney as their coach. We knew she was going to be able to put this group together and get this group understanding each other. And after this weekend, it sure did look like they understood a lot more of each other and how they were looking forward to going to playing forward in the season.
Yeah, the loss to the Spirit for San Diego must have been a huge wake up call because they didn't have much to show in that game. And Coach Stoney, I knew she wouldn't take those gains and just put it aside and continue to go on with her system. She's a coach who wants to figure out how she can beat each team. Before we move on to some of the other coaching at NWSL, I want to go back to Racing Louisville because I agree with you on how sat deeper. And I think that's what made DeMello sit deeper and not get into the attack as much last season. Kim Bjorkergren's really been big in his media calls about getting DeMello higher up the pitch, allowing her to take shots, finish opportunities. And that's what we've seen the change. I think how being named captain has given her confidence, and having Urseg behind you gives you confidence just to move higher up the pitch, and knowing that this team supports you and is around you and wants to see you be successful. And it's taken time. I mean, Racing Louisville brought in a number of new players this season. Kanu is their true 9, and she hasn't fully fit into the NWSL perfectly. She is adjusting to this league being transitional, and that's a word we use all the time, but it's so true about the league. You have to do the defensive work if you're a 9 in this league. You can't just be an attacker, and she's trying to figure out that system, but she looked better against Chicago. Paige Monahan is a good player in this league, but I think even better veteran and leader. The way that she talks and the way that she's brought in even more on a morale to this team on that left flank has proven that this racing team just needed a few extra pieces. And I think they have a really good coach behind them who, I still think we're early into the season and we'll see how things play out. But they have Kansas City coming up, and then they have the Courage. So really good test for this Racing Louisville team. We'll see how it plays out. Mark Parsons, he is just such a great coach. How Mark Parsons can seamlessly fit into the Washington Spirit, use the players that he has, move players around. He's traded some players away that he doesn't think are great fits inside the Spirit. Jordan Baggett being a great example of that. And I think it's taken some time, and he knew it would take some time, but using Rodman, trusting their back line, putting Tara McKeown on that back line in the center back role for the Spirit. And then when you have Aubrey Kingsbury in goal, you have someone who's a steady, consistent captain for this team. There's so many pieces to dive into for this Washington Spirit team, but I think it all starts with Mark Parsons and his phenomenal coaching, having a goal and having, what he wants to do be center focused at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. I think Parsons, what I like about Parsons is, I think it was earlier this year, I read an article about, it was on Pep Guardiola at Man City, and he was basically saying, if I had lesser players, lesser talent, I would lose because this is how I like to play. So when I don't have great players, it'll affect the way we play. Whereas Parsons, he will change the way he coaches and the systems he plays based on his personnel. So you give him any team and he will end up becoming a winning coach with that team. And that's what I think is so interesting about Parsons is he could go to any one of these 12 teams in the NWSL and turn them around almost instantaneously. So if I'm Chicago, if I'm Orlando right now, man, I'm looking, how long is his contract? Is there a way we can get this guy? Because he has proven that he can take a team And whatever the components are of the team, yeah, he will trade some players away. He will, but it'll be what's best for the soul of the team. And that's what this Washington team does not play like the Portland teams that he had. They play a different style, a different system, and he's doing what he needs to do and teaching these players themselves basically and how they all work together. And I just think the guy he's such a sensational coach. And to take Washington, and he even said it's going to take us some time. It's going to take us about 12 games. Well, he's way ahead of schedule, way ahead of schedule. And then when you talk to some of the players on Washington, they're so excited to go to practice every day. They want to be there because they're not just winning, but they're learning. They're learning their style of soccer. They're learning a new style of soccer. They're learning a system. They're making themselves better players, and that's the beauty of Parsons. He gets his teams so excited to play and so enthralled to be out there on the field, and then do what's necessary for them to win as a unit. And you're right, Parsons he's the story of the NWSL right now, this early in the season.
Michelle Kang is the one who got Mark Parsons to Washington. So if you bring in another Michelle Kang into your team, maybe you can get him away from Washington, D.C. But I think he is stuck with them. He loves them. I think he's very happy about the talent he has within his system. Like you said, Scotty, Portland was very possession based and they had a really good midfield and obviously phenomenal attackers in Crystal Dunn, Christine Sinclair. So he focused on them. However, coming to the Spirit, he doesn't have that talent in the midfield, but he has that talent out wide with Rodman. He has that talent with Sanchez and Hatch up top and Tara Miquion moving back into her role. He knows as a coach, like you said, just to reiterate it, there is so much talent in different spots and he knows how to work with it. Another coach in the NWSL who's done a great job of getting his team back into the winning column and changing their system is Sean Nahas with the North Carolina Courage. They are a completely different team in the last three results, getting the win over Houston, putting up 3 goals against the Portland Thorns, in this past week, beating OL Reign 1-0, who Reign weren't in the game at all. Sean Nahas wants to play possession-based style. He's always wanted to play that way, but you mentioned triangles early on in this podcast. I forget which team you were talking about specifically, but you could see it all over the field against OL Reign. He wanted overloads, and that's exactly what we saw against the Reign. There was always numbers up, putting Ryan Williams up out wide, getting Tyler Lucy back into the starting 11, drawing the tension away from Caroline, and making this be a team where they're going to win in numbers up and not just rely on Caroline, who most of the teams in the league will tell you it used to be our focus was shutting down Caroline in the attack. Lucy, Denise O'Sullivan was taken away at the beginning of the game. She found a way back in to get the ball on her foot in the midfield. I think Nahas has done a good job of waiting to get his younger players caught up to how he wants to play. And now we're starting to see the system fit their personnel well.
Yeah, I agree. Sean has done a wonderful job with Carolina. Yes, he's a possession based. He's break the lines, but the thing that he's doing, and you're right, it is triangles, but it's not just triangles. He also plays his triangles on different planes of the field, so they can bypass breaking the lines and then come back breaking the lines and then go forward again breaking the lines, and it's super interesting to watch. The other thing they do is they really move well off the ball for each other. So if one player moves, you can see that dictates where the next player moves. And you have to say, we talked about it early, like our first show or second show when we were getting ready for the NWSL season. Sean Nahas was our player, our person to watch at Carolina. We all said we wanted to see how O'Sullivan did in this role now, becoming the captain, becoming the true leader, becoming the focal point of, if she has a bad game, it's a big problem for this team. And she has done her job exponentially. She's been amazing, I think, this year. But also Sean being able to, he's moved some players. He's moved Williams to the outside. He's done some things. He's changed up his front line. We've said it over and over that we have to have Lucy on the field. She's the one that gets the goal. She's very dynamic out wide. She's gone from an outside back to a winger, but it allows them almost to play at the old term of almost total football. This ball just gets moving and pinging around, and it's hard for defenses to slide and shift and shape because the ball moves so quickly off their feet. And like I said, they're not just breaking lines, they're breaking lines on different planes on the field. So when you watch them, their triangles are never flat ever. There's never one flat line in their triangle. It's always offset of a triangle, which makes them really hard to defend, because as a defender, you have to pick and choose which one? Do I step higher? Do I stay back? If you stay back, they play into the high player to get back to the back player to then attack. It's really interesting to watch, and it's fun to watch. And it's. I thought it was going to take a little bit more time, but they must be doing things in practice and training in practice at such a high level that it's translating to the field much faster than I thought it was going to.
You mentioned the triangles breaking up the lines and defenders having to pick and choose their moments. OL Reign had Bethany Balser in the 10, and she was pressed on O'Sullivan the majority of the game. She didn't sit back and give the space in front of O'Sullivan, so it took out O'Sullivan. But Miura had a good game getting in those pockets we normally see O'Sullivan in. So in the midfield specifically, teams have to figure out when and who they want to step to and how they can step. But also teams just have to know going into these games against the Courage, they're going to have to run because North Carolina runs. They lose the ball, they take 2 or 3 steps into a new position, and it's always been possession based for this North Carolina side, but it's definitely different with the new players. And I'm excited to see how the Courage continue to build on that. They're playing Angel City this weekend at home. Not a team who had a great performance necessarily against the Washington Spirit, but they're still at the top. And I think they have a lot to prove. So how is, Julie Ertz, Danny Weatherhole, and Savannah McCaskill going to handle that North Carolina midfield centrally?
Yeah, I think with Angel City, with Angel City, is there a team that likes to attack? And I think if we look at the game where Washington played Carolina and it was a 1-0 game, Washington said, "Man, this team really moves the ball well." So what they did, and they run and they're fit. So what they did was they dropped. So they dropped and they didn't press. They didn't do their high press. They sat back. Well, Angel City likes the high press, and if you high press and Carolina breaks you down, they don't just break you down and then dribble. They keep that ball moving. They keep it getting off everybody's foot, so it's hard to recover. So I think if Angel City comes in and says, "Oh, we're Angel City. We like to attack. This is the way we play, free flowing." I think they're in a rude awakening coming into Carolina. Plus, it's been hot in Carolina, so if they get one of these 85-degree weathers, it's going to be hard for Angel City to just continually for 9 minutes chase it and try to. If they don't slow the game down, Angel City's going to be in trouble because they like to play at a high pace, Carolina, and that's just not in their press. That's in the way they move the ball and move around the field. So I think Angel City needs to take a page out of Parsons' book, and he said, I mean, the last 35 minutes of that Washington Spirit game, Trinity Rodman was basically a right back.
Mm-hmm.
She was sitting real deep and allowing play to be in front of them. It allows the ball to stay in front of you. And if the ball's in front of you, it's not in the back of the net. So I think sometimes when you come into Carolina, we were expecting. I remember they were picked to end up last, and they never let that affect them. They're young players. They're all taking roles from their leadership group of Nahas, of O'Sullivan, of their veteran players. So Angel City is going to have to be aware of if they cannot dictate the pace, they better not high press the entire game because they will move the ball around them. And Ertz will get caught too high at times, and they'll be able to play in behind her, and that'll be dangerous for Angel City because they at times are a little disjointed in the back when Ertz gets too high and they
Mm-hmm.
get disorganized, and that's where they're susceptible on the counterattack because they have so many players, Angel City, that like to attack and like to get after the game. But if the game goes the way the neutrals want it, as we would want it, it'll be a very interesting game if they can both kind of get bits and pieces of the tempo of the game. It'll be really interesting to see how Angel City comes in to Carolina to play. But I think, like I said, Parsons showed us the way is you kind of have to sit, you got to let them have the ball, but you let them have the ball where you want them to have the ball. And then sooner or later, I think Carolina will get a little bit antsy and they'll try to press the game. And that's where you can maybe steal some passes and counterattack on them. And Angel City does have the players with Thompson and McCaskill and Endo where they can counterattack. They do have the speed and the skill to be able to do it. Now, are they willing to and do they want to play that style of soccer? That'll be the interesting point.
Alyssa Thompson likely will be playing against either Emily Fox or Ryan Williams, and she likes to find herself 1v1. I think you make a really good point with Angel City has to drop off more than even the Washington Spirit because they don't have as solid as a back line as the Washington Spirit do. I wouldn't necessarily trust Gordon Nielsen, Ime Vinola, and Ali Riley to be that back line in 2v1 situations against North Carolina. I don't think they would be able to break it down by themselves. I think they need Ertz's help. So it will be very interesting to see what Angel City does against North Carolina. The weather will likely be a huge factor. It was for OL Reign coming from the Pacific Northwest. High heat, middle of the day, sunshine. You could see this older team in OL Reign was certainly impacted by the weather. Okay, last segment of the day, Scotty. You have a yellow penny for us. What is it?
I do, and it hurts you. I'm a huge basketball fan. Obviously soccer's my favorite, but I love the NBA. I love the athletes. I love how just the things they can do on the court just amazes me. But my yellow penny has got to go to Ja Morant. Somebody needs to sit this kid down and say, you are a role model. You are an inspiration for younger players. You just went through some problems. I don't understand the gun thing. I'm not a gun person. I don't understand it at all. Listen, I like rap music too, but I don't want to be hanging out with rappers, throwing
Yeah.
money around and having my gun shown on Instagram. I just don't understand it. This kid is throwing his career away. And like, I think people have to step in and start to help this guy. And it's going to be some hurtful. But Nike, you want to make some money, Nike, but come on, pull his shoes off. Nobody needs to be buying Ja Morant shoes. Let's help this kid so that he has a long career. He can help his family out. But for me, my yellow jersey goes to Ja Morant. You just went through some therapy stuff. You came back. You said, you got to make some changes. And within a week, 2 weeks, you're back doing the same thing. So to me, you were just saying things to appease us, to appease your sponsorships, to appease your coaching staff. But for what this kid's ability is, I mean, it's just someone needs to sit him down and take care of this kid and put your arm around him and tough love, whatever it needs to be. But this, for me, I was a Ja Morant fan, but I will not be cheering for Ja Morant until he straightens his act out because it's a shame. It's a shame. So my yellow jersey goes to Ja Morant.
That was really sad to see. I remember the whole gun situation a few months ago. And sometimes, you need the right people in your camp to help you fix whatever's going on. And I know he got drafted young. I know he's had a start to his career so young, and maybe he needs some life experiences to open up his eyes. But you definitely don't want to see players get suspended for situations that could have easily be prevented. I don't have a yellow penny this week, Scotty, but I decided to rename our fun things because that's just a terrible name for a segment. Right now, I decided to rename it Selly, our Selly of the week. But again, anyone listening, if you have something better than Selly of the week, we want to hear it because maybe in opposition of yellow penny, I'm not sure what it would look like. But my celebration of the week is MLS is reportedly set to expand to San Diego in the 2025 season. They'll be playing at Snapdragon, where the Wave play currently in the NWSL. And Mohamed Mansour, a British Egyptian billionaire, is expected to pay a $500 million fee to start the club in San Diego. He's partnered with a federally recognized tribe called Sakan Band, which is an indigenous American tribe believed to have been in the San Diego area for more than 12,000 years, according to reports. I think San Diego is the obvious answer. They already have a USL club, but I think having an MLS team brings more eyes to San Diego, and San Diego fans love sports. We saw what the Padres have done in the playoffs, how people have rallied around them. I think it's time to see what on the men's side in MLS specifically. I know that they support USL well, and I know there's some contention there between USL and MLS, but we've seen what the Wave can draw at San Diego with the Wave in the NWSL rather. So I think it's a great idea to bring soccer and MLS to San Diego, and it's my celebration of the week. Hopefully it'll be announced this week. That's what the reports are expecting.
I think San Diego is a great pick. I think one of the things in U.S. Soccer that kind of hurts is proximity, because in soccer in Europe, there's so many teams are so closely knit, so the fan bases have such great rivalries. So now with another team in California, now
Right.
the fan bases can kind of get against each other, and that helps the spirit of the game. I think when your fan bases are so into your team, and then there's a team that's close where I could be living in San Diego, but I was an LAFC fan maybe because there wasn't a team in San Diego. Now there is a team in San Diego. So now I could go to work and have some banter with my fellow workers. That the proximity of teams really helps the atmosphere at games, the atmosphere for the players. Like when I played in Rochester, Pittsburgh was close, Toronto was close, Montreal was close. So these rivalries grow not just out of what happens on the field, but because of the fan bases being able to be around each other more and have more banter and have more to go at each other a little bit. And I think that's because the U.S. is so big, like what we saw this weekend with the rivalry week, whereas Kansas City now is going into St. Louis this week. So you got the two teams right there, Kansas City and Missouri. You have the New York teams. When the NYFC plays the Red Bull, it's just a better game because there's bragging rights on the line. And I think San Diego, another team in California, just helps with the proximity of these pro teams, will help with the rivalries on the field. It'll just make the game that much more interesting and that much more fun to watch.
Totally agree. I think that having another club on the West Coast in Southern California continues to grow what they're doing in MLS. I think the fan base in San Diego, even the other week, I was in San Diego, the Dodgers were in town to play the Padres, and the amount of Dodgers fans there was insane. And I know it would be the same if the Galaxy or LAFC play the San Diego team for MLS. You would see all those fans come down because I know how much they love soccer and how much they're invested in it. So I hope to see, they're expecting to hear the announcement on Thursday, but I expect it by the end of the week. So we will see. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Straight from the Pitch this week. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at SFTP Pod. And we will see you guys back here next Wednesday.
Have a great week.